Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our final session for the Point of Pride Virtual Summit. We are so super excited about this important conversation about why the time is now and that we really can't afford to wait for federal LGBTQ protections. I'm Angela Hughey. I'm the co-founder and president of One Community. We're so delighted that you're all here with us today, and I'm super excited to be here with my co-moderator and dear friend, Michael Soto, because our organizations are the co-founders of the Equality and Fairness for All Americans Coalition. Michael?
Thank you, my friend. I'm Michael Soto. I'm the CEO of Equality Arizona and the co-founder with my dear friend Angela of the Equality and Fairness for All Americans Coalition. Many are unaware, but since 1974, civil rights protections for LGBTQ Americans have been introduced in Congress nearly every year without success, leaving millions of Americans vulnerable to harm. Today, we are facing a quickly closing window to pass federal non-discrimination legislation in this Congress before the midterm elections. We view the current moment for passage as one that may not present itself again for so many years to come.
And so to that end, coalitions across the country are literally working tirelessly to forge a way forward and find a bipartisan solution that can land a historic LGBTQ inclusive non-discrimination bill on President Biden's desk. Today, we're going to talk about that path forward so that LGBTQ federal protections actually become a reality. And before we get into the discussion, I just want to give our panelists each an opportunity to introduce themselves. Sarah Kate, would you like to kick us off?
Sure. Well, thank you again for having me. I'm thrilled to be here. My name is Sarah Kate Ellis. I'm the president and CEO of GLAAD, which is the LGBTQ advocacy organization. We work in media to accelerate acceptance for the LGBTQ community.
Shapri?
Thank you. It's so good to be here. My name is Shapri LoMaglio. I'm a principal at the Raben Group, a public affairs firm located in Washington, D.C. And I have been advocating for LGBTQ rights for almost a decade and am so grateful for this opportunity for this conversation. Thanks, Angela.
Thank you, Shapri. And Reverend Marian.
Hello, my name is Reverend Marian Edmonds-Allen, and I'm the executive director of Parity, and we're an organization that works at the intersection of faith and LGBT, and I am thrilled to be here.
So excited to share this remarkable hour with all of you, and so I'll tee us up with our first question. With so many advances in LGBTQ rights in recent years, what have been, in your mind's eye, some of the biggest impasses to passing federal equal protections in recent years?
I think one of the biggest challenges to moving this forward is that people think the problem is solved. And I think that's something where education is such an important part of the strategy to move this federal protection forward, because when you survey LGBTQ people and or non-LGBTQ people, the majority on both sides believe that we are protected. So I think that's been an enormous hurdle here for us to move this forward, because if there doesn't seem to be a need for it, why create a solution to a problem that doesn't exist? So we have to educate so many people about the challenges that we have as a community. And we talk often about the really only federal protections that we have are through the Supreme Court, right? At this stage. Otherwise, we have a patchwork of protections around 29 states. You all probably know it better than I do. 29 states, I believe, have some level of protection for the LGBTQ community. And we need something comprehensive that is on the books that protects the LGBTQ community and ensures and enshrines our civil rights.
I have a slightly different angle on this because my work is within rural contexts mainly. And so it's a different perception that rural LGBT folks have, in that they often feel kind of a hopeless feeling that anything can ever happen, because in their community, they may not have an LGBT organization nearby. They may not have a worship space. They may not have any supports at all. And the rhetoric that they hear, or maybe the local and state laws, aren't friendly to them. So for them, it's kind of this feeling that, wow, we are never going to be able to do this. And a feeling that, gosh, I wish something could happen, but I don't think anything ever will. We had a tragic story a couple of weeks ago with a parent saying that their trans child died by suicide the day before their birthday because they lived in a rural area and they just didn't see a happy future for themselves in the world. So to me, that's why there's such urgency around getting these federal protections passed. We need them now.
And I would add, as somebody who, lives and works here in Washington, D.C., that there's just been a failure to achieve the right kind of compromise that can get, 60 bipartisan votes and get this, as you said, Angela, over the line and onto the president's desk. I mean, just like any legislation that passes is going to have to just find a way forward that includes, some things that maybe both sides don't like a little bit, but it helps it get to the finish line. And on this issue, we've had just approaches that have been very idealistic and very pure, and that would be the best, best language that people can think up that would be law, but that hasn't been able to become law. And so now it's time, I think, for people to say, well, what can we get over the finish line? What can we get 60 votes on and get President Biden to sign to, as Marian just pointed, like things are quite dire in some states, and there's a real move right now where things are getting really much worse, very fast. And so we need federal protections in some ways more than ever. And just like, it's been a victim of partisanship and polarization in the same way. It wasn't, I think it was in 2014 that the Senate passed the Employment Non-Discrimination Act. I think it was 67 votes. So, we're 8 years later, things are just have more polarized. And so it's just going to take, it's going to take everybody pulling together to really put a lot of pressure on Congress to get this done and find some language that can get 60 votes in the Senate and, the right number in the House and get it over the line.
Wow.
Yeah. I'm so sorry, Michael. I just wanted to add something that I really want to give you the ball and let you run with it. To Marian's point, we look at, Michael and I are in Arizona, and we have 10 municipal ordinances that are inclusive. They protect by population 50% of the state. It is vastly more our rural areas that don't have inclusive protections. To Sarah Kate's point, I think it's 20 states, there's 330 municipal ordinances, there's a patchwork of laws. And so if you're an LGBTQ American, it really does depend on the zip code that you're in as to whether or not you have inclusive protections. And unfortunately, in some of our more rural areas as well, there is that feeling of just deeper vulnerability. So now I feel like I've teed it up for you, my friend, to take the ball and run with it. Go for it, Michael.
Thank you, my friend. All right. So the Equality Act and the Fairness for All Act have been viewed as the potential vehicles to successfully pass federal equal rights protections for LGBTQ people, but neither can seemingly pass the current landscape. The Fairness for All Act is stalled in the House and the Senate, or the Equality Act is stalled in the Senate. So this means that there must be some sort of compromise in order to make progress. That's why earlier this year, all of us on this panel came together to form the Equality and Fairness for All Americans Coalition, a group of LGBTQ business, faith organizations, and everyday Americans who all want to see federal protections for LGBTQ Americans become reality. We have a few guiding principles that we want to share with the audience. We believe that providing protections for all Americans in employment, education, housing, credit, jury service, and public accommodations is absolutely critical for members of the LGBTQ community and the faith community. Banning conversion therapy to protect millions of LGBTQ Americans from harm. This universally damaging practice has been condemned by every major medical association and so many religious leaders across the country, not to mention LGBTQ people. Reducing the minimum number of employees needed for federal civil rights protections for everyone from 15 to 0, which would drastically expand the number of Americans protected against employment discrimination based on race, sex, sexual orientation, gender, age, disability, color, creed, national origin, and religion. and ensuring that religious institutions continue to receive federal dollars for social services and education. Why do these principles matter, and why have you joined this effort to expand these principles and rights through the legislative process? Should we start with Marian?
Sure, Michael, thank you. There are so many reasons why I'm part of this coalition and this effort. I think the essence of it is being the mom of 2 trans kids and being someone who's worked on LGBT youth homelessness and suicide prevention for many years. This effort together sends a message to young people everywhere that people care about them, and the fact that it's a bipartisan coalition and a coalition of so many organizations, businesses, religious groups means a lot. It means that instead of, okay, well, these people like me, but these people don't like me. And instead of that, it's thinking, okay, there's a whole world out there of people who want the very best for me. And the fact that we're working together on this as a nonprofit organizational leader in the LGBT field, it's energizing for me to have colleagues and friends to work with, because we have so much good energy together that is new. To me, this is a watershed moment in terms of LGBT work in the world, that we are able to come together and to come together with surprising allies. So I see this as the start of a real change in the world and for the good.
As somebody who works to help support this coalition, I think one of the things that I think is really unique is, excuse me, I have a frog in my throat today. One of the things I think is really unique is that it's led by equality leaders from states that don't have LGBTQ protections. And I think that's really important. You all represent, you know, the people who are living in the very, you know, front of the challenges that we talked about on this call. And so I say that to say, I think, you know, there's nobody better positioned to remind Congress of what's at stake and to remind Congress of what is needed and the urgency and the elements that are most important, right? You've outlined some of them here. We've also talked about, you know, the need to codify Obergefell and codify Windsor. There's nothing like the Roe leak to remind us that our rights and our protections have never been more vulnerable to being revoked. And so I think the people best positioned to make that argument are the people living in states without rights and without protections.
Sarah Kate, a slightly modified version of the question for you. GLAAD has been working on federal protections for many years, and working with the states. I know y'all have been a great partner for us in Arizona. What do you all see as the opportunity of this moment?
I think someone used the word pressure, and I think that what I'm hearing a lot of from the members is that they're not getting the pressure from the business leaders. They're not hearing it. And that is on both sides of the aisle. And I have been literally around the world calling on CEOs to please use their moment with a member meeting to say that LGBTQ is really important to them, that it is a priority, that you know that there are bipartisan conversations happening. And I also like to always frame this too, is that, you know, this is a bipartisan and needs to be bipartisan. This is a bipartisan issue. It needs to be bipartisan because we're not political. We're human. And when we get politicized, it causes all of the hurt and the pain and the division that we are seeing in this country right now. This is not a political issue. This is a human issue. And honestly, it's a safety issue. The safety of our community is very, very much in the crosshairs of this country right now. And we're seeing it play out in real time. 31 members of a white supremacist organization arrested on Sunday in Idaho about to riot at a pride event, a peaceful gathering. is a clear indication that the rhetoric that's happening, these anti-LGBTQ bills, and the fact that we're being politicized in this culture and environment is going to cause grave harm. It's causing grave harm on our kids, right? I mean, the Reverend knows, she's on the front lines of this, and anyone that looks at the CDC numbers, that 1 out of 4 LGBTQ youth have attempted suicide last year. I mean, those numbers are crisis level numbers. So to me, why this is so important is because not only does it protect us, but it moves us from second-class citizens to citizenship. And I think that's a critical piece of this, and it stops politicizing us. It's enough already. So that's what's really important to us. It's why we're out and about. But I did want to make sure that people know that they have to, your senators have to hear from you. They have to hear from their constituents, and they need to hear from the business leaders, because it's happening now, and now's the time to speak up and act.
That's such a wonderful point. Thank you so much for talking about that, connecting business leaders and constituents to their representatives and sharing the urgency of this moment. And I know, GLAAD and One Community, I think, are the two organizations that do that the best, especially speaking to the business community. So I'll hand it back to my friend Angela.
Oh, you're so kind, Michael. Sarah Kate, to your point, that you're hearing that the business community is not putting the pressure on, it's not having those conversations with their elected representatives. I think one of the things that the real world struggle that we're having with larger organizations is, we have a number of organizations that are supportive of legislation that currently does not have bipartisan support, right? And so I had a conversation with one of our largest partners who feels caught, right? They're like, you have a very practical bipartisan way of going through this, and yet we're talking to large national partners who are not in that bipartisan framework that Equality and Fairness Coalition are working on. And so they feel caught. And I think we have a responsibility as organizations, regardless of whether or not we work at the local level or state level or national level, to come together and to assure the business community that we have their back, and that what matters to us is not the title, it is the content, right? That we need to get federal LGBTQ inclusive protections over the line, and we need to do it now. Because we so many vulnerable members within our community. And of course, to your point, the polarization, there's a USC report that came out 3 weeks ago with all of these anti-LGBTQ bills being introduced at highest number on record, I think, this year. LGBTQ issues are now the 5th most polarizing issue in our nation. So we have been politicized. This is not a human issue anymore. And which leads me to, and not only do we need to move forward, but with where we're at with the Roe leak, I think that there really is great concern that there could be existing protections for LGBTQ Americans that could be actually taken away. So can you all address that issue? The fact that there's some real issues potentially with marriage equality and with employment.
I'll just say to that point, it is alarming. And I don't think that we're being alarmists. If you look at what Alito said and what Thomas said, they said very crystal clear that they want to relook at marriage equality, and that they thought it was too far reaching. So I think there is real reason that we're responding. In addition to that, when you look at Roe v. Wade, the underpinning of Roe v. Wade is the 14th Amendment, right? And 14th Amendment is privacy, which is what Obergefell, which is marriage equality, is based on. So there are direct links. And further, I would say to that is that you have a piece of law that was decided on 50 years ago, that if those leaks are accurate, and we see what happens in the next few weeks, gets unraveled, we don't even have marriage equality for a decade yet. We haven't even had it for 10 years. So I think that there is very much a lot of concern in our community around our marriages and our employment, and how that what's standing between them right now are 9 justices, and that needs to be codified into federal law in order to really protect our families. I mean, we're talking about kids here, and families being ripped apart. And nobody thought Roe v. Wade could ever be unwound. And I want to say one last thing, is that what's really important here that gets lost in this whole conversation is that year over year, it's like 80%, 79 this year, percent of Americans believe that we should have equal protections. It's so simple. So all the other noise that happens is what starts unraveling it. The American people are for it. People know it's the right way. And Americans know it's American, it's our values to protect and for justice, and equality. So I think, that's where I'll leave Roe v. Wade.
Sarah Kate, thank you. That was beautifully said. As a woman married to a woman with 4 children, I mean, just the thought that our marriage might not be valid keeps me awake at night. And as someone whose faith is tremendously important to me, and the sacrament of marriage, to think about that, I mean, to me, that's a religious freedom violation for me. So that there's that. But also, as Sarah Kate said, this is really important to young people. I remember before we had achieved marriage equality, working with youth, and the wisdom at the time was, oh, well, LGBT people don't really care about marriage equality. Some do, but most people don't. Well, when marriage became legal in Utah, where I was working at the time, what I heard from young people was, okay, now I can have a future. Now I want to go to college. I want to get a good job because I want to get married and have children. It made all the difference to these young people. So marriage is of crucial importance to every American, and especially to the most vulnerable around us in the United States.
So beautifully said, both of you. You both have really emphasized the personal. I'm just going to also remind us briefly of the legal, which is less compelling in some ways, but also just helpful, just to say that, there have been previous past attempts to codify Roe, but they failed to get over the finish line because people couldn't agree on the details. They couldn't agree on, frankly, religious exemptions and how extensive they should be. And if Roe is to be, if the draft that we saw winds up being the final language, the only thing that will remain is the religious exemptions, and the rights will be gone. So it's a reminder, a like terrifying, compelling reminder that we got to get this done. And, the jots and the tittles should not be what stands in the way of getting this over the finish line. And we got to get any protections we can get right now. And if there are more that remain, we can come back for those later. But we got to get what we can get right now, because, as you both have so beautifully said, lives are literally at stake.
That's building a little bit off of what Shapri said and what everyone has said. I think this leak of the draft decision was such a good reminder for me that the Supreme Court making law is not the ideal situation, right? It's not what we want. We want Congress to make law. We want Congress to represent Americans as they're elected to do, and work together to create law. So for me, it's been, as a transgender man, as a Latino transgender man, such an important reminder of how important all of our voices are. And it's been, Marian and I have been in DC for quite a few weeks, and Angela has been coming in and out, and we've been bringing people from all over the country to talk with their senators and representatives about the need in our states, in our families, and in the community for full protections, and for, to Shapri's point, as many as we can get right now, hopefully protecting the most marginalized in our community and the most vulnerable, and ensuring, like Sarah Kate and Marian have talked about, that we have that future to look forward to, that young people can look forward and see, and that they can get married, that they can have a job, that they won't be denied housing, right, just because of who they are. And so that's been a very powerful reminder for me, and I hope everyone takes it and maybe even take some time today to contact their senators and representatives.
Good reminder. To the marriage equality piece, real quick, before I get on to the next question, my wife and I have been together for 28 years, and we were together 15 years before marriage equality came. And Sherry's had health issues in the past. And, I tell the story of how we drove around with these really, really thick envelopes, hoping that we had all of the proper legal paperwork prior to having the opportunity to get those 1,138 rights and protections that come with marriage that protect our family. I think living in an anxious space, Marian, to your point of the concern for families, just hoping that should something happen, we were protected. And we deserve full citizenship, as you said so beautifully, Sarah Kate. And Michael, to your point, talk to your representatives today. So next question, how can different communities and stakeholders engage in this effort to help how do we get this across the line? What are your suggestions?
I mean, I'm just going to repeat the stuff we said here already. If you're watching this, please, unless you live where I live in Washington, D.C., where you actually don't have any senators or representatives, which is a whole different issue for a different time, but please pick up your phone and call your senators and your representatives right now and tell them you need federal non-discrimination laws for LGBTQ people to pass right now. That's what they need. Like you said, that's what they need to hear. If you are a business, especially call. They need to hear that businesses need these laws to make them competitive. They need to hear that businesses rely on ensuring that their employees are going to stay in their state and aren't going to get run out of their state by the legislatures of these states. And Sarah Kate and Angela, you can speak even more to that, but they need to know that they need to hear from the 80% that want this done. And they need to, I think, saying to them, this isn't a political issue, this is a personal issue. I want to make sure that my son, my daughter, my nephew, my neighbor, my friend, the person I go to church with is protected, and that I know that they can keep their job and live a happy and healthy life, and that the teen LGBTQ kids I know are not ever told or do not ever believe that their life is not worth the same as everybody else's, and that they are beautiful. So they need to hear that. Make it personal. Make it both.
What I've been noticing and want to amplify is that I've been seeing young people now posting on social media, making short TikTok videos. As Michael said, we've been bringing we have delegations from all 50 states. So there's a lot of excitement in every single state in the country, and people are looking for ways to get involved. So the social media posts, TikToks, just plain talking to people. So I'm a faith leader, and what I encourage folks to do that are part of a faith community, talk to your faith leader, talk to people within your religious community, let them know that this is important to you. Right now I am Zooming to you from Brigham Young University, where I spoke this morning, and I talked about this. And here at Brigham Young University, there was such an outpouring of support, because people care deeply about religious freedom paired with protections for LGBT people, because what religious folks do, not always perfectly, but try to do, is to love and to act on their faith in love. So if you are a person of faith, or you know someone who is, this is a perfect way to live your faith in action, to get in touch with your elected representative, but also your community, to just say, you know what, this is important. This is why it's important. Say why it's important to you, and it needs to happen right now. We cannot wait any longer right now. So all of us need to speak up. Now is the time.
Marian, I love that. I'm going to build off of that just a little bit. We've had these incredible LDS families who have LGBTQ children and grandchildren coming to, and just people of faith in general from all over the country who are connected to the LGBTQ community, either are LGBTQ people or have family members. And they have had some of the most powerful stories and some of the most important stories that have really changed the way maybe folks in Congress completely set on supporting these federal protections, they're thinking about it differently now. And so I think one of the most important things I would encourage everyone to do, because we know telling our stories is how we change the hearts and minds of people, right? And that's ultimately how we change policy. Reach out to people that don't agree with you. Reach out to people that aren't vocal advocates and share your story. Share who you are, invite them into your life, and hear their story too. And you'll be surprised how far that goes for building strong relationships and bringing people in to this work, and how important it is to win these federal protections.
Sarah Kate, you work so closely with the business community. Do you want to add anything?
Sure, I'm happy to. I feel like a little bit of a repeat though, is that I feel that it is, we've seen, so a really interesting piece of information that I tote around with me is that employees trust, this is from the Edelman Trust Research, employees trust their employers more than they trust the government or media. So corporate has an outsized influence at this moment in time, and we want them to use that and leverage that. And they need to, because a lot of times and we work with so many of them, they have these internal values of inclusion and diversity, and then we need to see them use their leverage on the outside of that. And that is, like I said earlier, talking to members, using their platforms to talk about this, to educate, to personalize. I buy what everyone is saying. We know that storytelling moves hearts and minds, and that knowing someone who this is affecting changes hearts and minds. And we saw it with marriage equality, and we can see it with this as well. And so I think it's really important that businesses use that outsized ability and access they have to legislators to help move this along. And I would say, for everyone on this call too, who's not a business person, but works for a business, we all work for someone, use your voice to say this matters to you, and that you want to hear your upper management and your C-suite talking about this. With all of the hate that we've seen in this legislative session, this is a wonderful opportunity for companies to be more proactive than reactive. And so I think this is, in a way, a gift to corporates to come out ahead of something and say, we believe in this. We want to see our employees protected, our consumers protected, because it's not just about shareholders anymore. I mean, it's not just about shareholders anymore, it's about stakeholders. And that means employees, that means consumers, that means vendors. And they want to know where you stand on this now.
That's such an important point about the stakeholders and this sort of larger picture of what it means to do this work and how people can influence. We've talked a lot about bipartisanship as we're talking through these federal protections. I'm curious, aside from the math needed to win, just the simple math in each chamber, why, from your perspective, is bipartisanship important in terms of federal protections for LGBT people, and what does that look like?
I love this
Marian?
question. Yes, because what I've been seeing is that when we talk about being bipartisan, you can just see people brighten. Because when do you ever hear that word other than, oh, nothing's bipartisan anymore? So when we say, okay, we're doing this and it's bipartisan, they're like, really? Well, I want to be involved in it too, because we know that it's an American value to bring everyone together. And so this is something unique that's happening in the world. There aren't a lot of things that have bipartisan support. This is something that does, and the polling has been consistent on that. So I think for elected officials, this is something that is really important to them, and they're excited about it, and there's a lot of momentum with the elected officials. But I also think for everyday Americans, the fact that it's bipartisan, it's kind of a way to, a sigh of relief in a way. Okay, here's a safe dinner topic. We can all talk about this because it's something we can all agree on. And so I think this is a beautiful, hopeful, wonderful thing and a unique moment.
I would second that. I think you said that beautifully. And I would just add that it needs to be bipartisan because it is not political. And if it is partisan and on just one side, that is politicizing human beings. And, you know, when I think about when my wife and I have to explain, we have twin 13-year-olds, when we have to explain this to our kids, it's really hard and there are a lot of parents on this call, to explain this to your kids without it making absolutely no sense to them. So I think that it has to be bipartisan because it is bipartisan, because we are not political. We are just people, and we deserve to be protected.
Yeah, you said that. You both have said that so beautifully. You know, it's also the reality that, like, excuse me again, legislation that passes with bipartisan support is much more stable. The legislation that doesn't pass with bipartisan support, the Affordable Care Act being the most recent example of a large piece of national legislation that passed, and and it did not have bipartisan support. That doesn't mean it shouldn't have passed. It's still wonderful that it passed, but the lack of bipartisan support really helped one party just keep chipping away at it and trying to revoke it. Thankfully, that was defeated. But bipartisan legislation is going to be much more stable. And we've already talked about the instability that the Roe leak has created for LGBTQ rights. And we don't want that at the federal legislative level as well. And I think there's a template for this, right? We have over 20 states that have passed bipartisan LGBTQ rights legislation that protects LGBTQ people and has the religious exemptions in it that are frankly required under the Constitution, at least many of them, and it's gotten done. And if California and New York and states can do this, and we can do this. So I think Utah has done this. Utah is the most recent state to pass LGBTQ rights, and they did it in a bipartisan way. So it's blue states, purple states, red states. We can do this. We just have to have the will to get over the finish line, and everybody has to pull together.
I just want to add to that too. We are a world leader, and we need to lead by example. I think, how can we be a world leader in human rights if we're not even protecting our own citizens properly? So this should be this should be an imperative for all legislators to be leaders, not only within our own country, but in a global society. And we were a little behind on marriage, but we caught up. Let's lead here. There are other countries that have led and actually have constitutional amendments that are inclusive. But I think that we still have an opportunity to be a leader here. And it's a wonderful moment for our Congress to take a leadership moment.
I love that, Sir Kate. I think the American people are hungry for that kind of leadership. Y'all are so brilliant. And I would love to hear Angela's take on this as well. Actually.
Well, I mean, I just think that, sure, Michael, thank you so much for not that we need any more brilliance, because you've all been so remarkable in this answer. I think that we're not binary people, right? And we're not a binary nation. We have to find ways to unite folks and bring people together. And I believe that LGBTQ liberty and religious liberty can walk hand in hand, right? And what we've seen in the work that we've done collaboratively with our great partners and friends at Equality Arizona is that when we sit down and when we meet people where they're at, and we talk about the things we have in common, we can find ways to be inclusive, and that doing what's right is also very good business, right? And so also to your point, Sarah Kate, from a leadership standpoint, this is leadership, and this is about sustainability as well, right? If we are a nation that does not welcome everyone and is not inclusive, this is a global economy that we live in, right? We need to be doing everything we can to be pro-business, and to attract and retain the best and the brightest. That is every business that is has a sustainable business model knows that being inclusive is number one, the right thing to do, and it's good business. States that have inclusive models are at a competitive advantage. When we look at the state of Arizona, we're literally surrounded. Every state around the state of Arizona is inclusive, more inclusive than the state of Arizona is. And when we sit in these meetings talking about our bipartisan framework, we're sitting with families talking about how their children who happen to be LGBTQ are educated in the state of Arizona, are getting their college education in the state of Arizona, and then they are taking their degrees elsewhere to other states in our nation because they don't feel safe living in the great state of Arizona. Add to that 50 states, we have a sustainability issue if we are not inclusive. And so this is the right thing to do. And it is a moral imperative, and there's a business imperative as well, at least in my mind.
Michael, can I also just add, and others have said this, I just want to repeat it because it's such an important point. Policy debates on this topic are about people, and we have to stop this being debated. That LGBTQ people it's about dignity, it's about our humanity, and this cannot be something that passes with one party vote and continues to be debated. We need bipartisan consensus on the Hill that reflects the bipartisan consensus in America among Americans. And we need to put this to bed once and for all. Our dignity is not up for debate.
Shapri, that's so powerful, especially with I don't know if y'all saw this, but there was a New York Times article that came out essentially debating the human dignity of trans people. And as a trans person, it means a lot to me to be reminded by wonderful, amazing friends and allies like, are on this call that we all matter and we all deserve that basic human dignity. I'll hand it back over to Angela to wrap us up.
Well, so it is remarkable that we are dreaming and aspiring to basic human dignity and basic human rights, but that is what this conversation was about. So let's aspire and let's dream and let's, in our mind's eye, get this over the line. What would passing bipartisan legislation to grant millions of Americans equal federal civil rights protections mean to each and every one of you? Not just as a leader, but as a person, as in your family, what in your community. What does it mean to you to get this work done?
For me, I got into this work. I was in the private sector up until 8 years ago, and I got into this work when my wife and I had children. So for me, I see what's going on with kids today, with queer kids today, how much they're being bullied. I see why we're seeing these high rates of, contemplation and trying or attempted suicide. And I think that this would signal to them in a very powerful way that they matter. And like the Reverend was saying with marriage, I think it would give so many kids a view of a future. So that's what I think why this is so important. And on the other side of it, I think that it's still criminal in 69 countries to be LGBTQ, and this sets a new standard. When America moves, or we like to say when America sneezes, the world catches a cold, and this would move that forward as well that we've been working on.
Sarah, Kate said that beautifully. It is about the children. As a mom of 2 trans kids, I want the world to be a better place for them. I've seen them have real challenges in their lives with not being able to access a restroom all day at school for year after year after year, to not being able to get a job, keep a job, to, okay, do I need to hide who I am? Do I need to change my presentation because then maybe I could keep a job? I mean, what does that say? We're not full Americans when we're not able to do that. And what can I say to my children about what career path they should take when it's so hard to keep employment in so many areas of the country? So we need to do this for our children. And we also need to do this as a country. I'm a proud American. My dad was a service member. I proudly fly the American flag. It means a lot to me to be an American. This is an American value. Equality and fairness for every American is a core value, and we need to live into that. And we need to do that now, and we need to do it together. And this is our opportunity for every single American to come together and say, yes, we can do this, and we need to do this right here, right now.
There's little more to say because, wow, those were beautiful and compelling answers. I would just, exactly what Marian said is what I had, that every time America does what we say that we believe in, and we say that we aspire to, and we say that's who we are, even though we don't always fail and often don't live up to that, we take one step closer to being the country that we say that we hope to be and we want to be, and that is important. And living with equality and justice under the law, it's kind of the core bedrock thing, and this is a huge step towards that. And the final thing I would say on a personal note, I grew up in the kinds of communities that you're talking about, where kids don't hear that they're valued. And the country taking the step shows kids in those families that that's not the norm. that's not, that there's hope, like you said, for the future, that there's hope beyond the today, and that the vast majority of people and the country and the law is with you. It's on your side. It wants to protect you. It sees you as valuable. It sees you as beautiful. It sees the potential that you have. And that is what we need to send. We need to send that signal to every single American, and most especially the LGBTQ kids.
So incredible. And yes, I think we all would feel like our careers were made for if we get to be a part of passing this kind of historic legislation and see that young people have a different future. And I also want to say on a note, I think it would mean something for people like me, transgender people, especially transgender people of color, that we have a future, that we'll be able to hold jobs, that maybe we'll be able to retire someday, that we'll just live to see the future. I know I'm long past my life expectancy, and that makes me really sad because I'm in my early 40s, and that shouldn't be the case. It would also mean that for amazing elders like Miss Major, who was at Stonewall, who started this work long before that, they would get to see their life's work literally change the fabric of our society in such a profound way that every single American gets to fully participate in this society, is valued for who they are, and gets to contribute in the most meaningful ways. And at the core, I think that's what we've all been talking about, because we've all said this is about humans. This is about every single person being treated with dignity in this country and having the same opportunities as everyone else. And I have faith every day because of leaders like all of you. And it is an honor and a pleasure to work with you. I want to ask everyone to go to equalityandfairness.com. Please read about our bipartisan framework, the work that we've been doing, and please help us get there. Contact your elected officials today. Tell them how important it is, and you can actually do that on our website. And so I highly encourage you to sign up and to contact your elected officials to tell them that every American deserves to be treated the same in this country under the law. And that's what this work is about. So thank you all so much. It was a pleasure to be with you. And I just have been inspired by all of y'all daily. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all for your leadership.
Same. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Pride Month.